Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 3858a, and today's date is March 11th, 2026. And the title of the episode is, Could Trump use the 14th Amendment, Section 4 to remove debt? Economic pieces coming together. Central banks cause inflation, and that is a threat to you, your savings account, your retirement. Ask yourself an honest question. Does your dollar go as far as it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even last year? So what does the next decade look like for you and your savings? If your portfolio lacks exposure to gold, one of history's most reliable economic hedges, it's time to rethink your strategy. Gold has kept up with inflation and in many periods outpaced it. My friends at Noble Gold Investment specialize in helping people protect their wealth with physical gold and silver. Whether you're rolling over an IRA or making a direct purchase, their team walks you through the entire process and makes it very simple. No pressure, just education and experience. Right now, all new qualified accounts will receive a free 1/10 of an ounce American Gold Eagle as a thank you. Visit X22Gold.com. That is X22Gold.com, and discover how easy it is to protect your financial future. Or just click the link in the description. And remember, past performance may not be indicative of future results. Investing in precious metals involves risk. Consult your financial advisor before making investment decisions. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, the deep state, the corrupt politicians, the private West Central Bank, the World Economic Forum. You can see that Trump right now, he's taking control of the energy sector. He's building refineries, bringing the manufacturers back to this country, setting up all the pieces for the new golden age economic system. That's what we're witnessing right now. And yes, we're still feeling the hangover from the Biden administration. That just won't go away because you have to remember inflation is cumulative. So whatever you experienced during the Biden administration, you're still going to experience that now. It just doesn't disappear. Yes, you can mitigate it with lower energy. Yes, you can mitigate it with higher wages. Yes, you can mitigate it with removing the taxes. You could do all of these things. But until you remove the central bank system, until you go back to sound money, the inflation is here to stay. And yes, every single year you'll be adding 1-2% of inflation to the inflation that we already have today. That is the biggest problem right now. And that's what most of the people are feeling. And once again, I do believe in the end, that is Trump's mission. His mission is to remove us from the central bank system. And a lot of people say, well, how do we get rid of all this debt? We, $37 trillion worth of debt. Well, what's very interesting is that in the 14th Amendment, Section 4, back during the Civil War, they put that in there because if there was an insurrection, which there was back then, any debt that was created by an insurrection was just null and void. Now, think about this. What if Trump shows that the deep state players overthrew the United States government in 2020? What happens if Trump shows, going all the way back to Obama, that is when the insurrection, the insurgency started? And ever since then, we've had an insurgency/insurrection. And we've been fighting against this insurgency/insurrection. Would that debt be nullified? Now, Congress would have to make the decision. Now, take this to the next level. What if, or maybe when, we win the midterms and we have patriots in the House, patriots in the Senate, and the evidence starts to come out and Congress makes that decision? What happens? Well, if we bring it back to 2020, and let's say they only rule that we can go back to 2020, the debt back then would be $27 trillion. If we go all the way back to when Obama came into office, the debt would be $10 trillion, which is very interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, you would wipe out $27 trillion worth of debt. And what if, through criminal investigation, and we showed this yesterday with Bernanke, where he was testifying in front of Congress, and nobody knows where all this money went. What happens if they took the trillions of dollars, added it onto the debt, and said the people owed it, but it was all through the central bank system, and the people really had nothing to do with this, and a lot of it was criminal activity. Through fraud, do the people have to pay this? So does our debt level come down quite a bit from 10 trillion? What happens if about 2 trillion was due to fraud? Let's just use that number. That means we have 8 trillion left to pay off. Is that difficult at this point in time? No, it isn't. And that is very interesting. We'll be talking a lot more about this a little bit later. But first, let's talk about what's happening with the global economic system right now, because it looks like because of what's happening in Iran, China is having a very, very difficult time right now. Because you have to remember, most of the oil from Venezuela, most of the oil from Iran went into China. And you can see with Trump now shifting everything, China is having a very difficult time. Remember, China was supposed to be the powerhouse of the new economic system. And now they're barely hanging on. Trump is removing their power step by step. Peter Sayong put this out and said, China just announced their lowest growth target since 1991. And that was before oil prices spiked, which could knock growth below Bangladesh. Is the China miracle turning into a Japan-style zombie economy? Maybe. And when we start to look at this, we could see things are ramping up quite rapidly. When you look at what is going on in China, you see there are people now standing online for fuel. And thousands, and David Blockman put this out, thousands of Chinese drivers lining up at gas stations to fill their tanks before major price increases go into effect. This is what things looked like in the U.S. during the oil shocks of 1973 and 1979, when gas was rationed and drivers could only gas up on alternative days based on their last number of their car's license plate. This is what U.S. drivers no longer have to worry about thanks to shale revolution and Trump's energy dominance agenda, where he's drilling like crazy in this country. And actually, he's also building a refinery. We'll be talking about that in just a sec. But think about that. Think about what's happening. And by the way, there was no oil shortage. We were coming off the gold standard, moving into the petrodollar system. And this is why we saw a flux in the system, because we were transitioning into a new system. So basically, you couldn't get oil. You couldn't get anything because, again, you could see things were really breaking down during that point of time. But everything kind of ironed itself out. Of course, they raised interest rates like crazy just to keep everything status quo. The currency lost value like crazy. We saw inflation like we've never seen before. And that shifted us right onto the petrodollar system. But you could see that China is panicking right now because of what is going on. The United States is really not affected because we're pretty much energy independent, and it's getting better and better every single day. And think about it. The fuel prices that all of a sudden shot up, there was no reason for that. Absolutely no reason. We'll be talking about that in just a sec. But look what's happening out in Germany. Since they went all green and they decided to remove their coal-fired plants, gas, they started to shut down and destroy their nuclear power plants. Now, like we mentioned yesterday, they want to rebuild the nuclear power plants because, once again, they made a huge mistake. All of a sudden, we're starting to see that the manufacturers within Germany, it looks like they're having a huge amount of problems. And Volkswagen is losing half their profit. They're going to be cutting around 50,000 jobs over the next 4 years. And when you look at this, you could see they pretty much gave everything away. And also China is very competitive with Germany right now. Volkswagen just revealed its operating profit sank like a stone last year, dropping by more than a half as tariffs, Chinese competition, and shifting strategies took serious bite out of the bottom line. What about all the energy to create these cars? And that performance now has the VW's group execs reaching for the cost-cutting scissors, including plans to shed 50,000 jobs. And this was very predictable. EU car companies buy Chinese car company carbon credits to avoid the EU fines. The Chinese car companies then use the carbon credit revenue to subsidize lower-priced Chinese EVs to the European car market, thereby undercutting the European EV car companies. The EU tariff applied to gasoline-powered cars or hybrids from China is 10%. That tariff is not enough to stop the imports. The Chinese hybrid autos are substantially less than European car brands, and there's no financial incentive for China to build auto plants in the EU zone, especially when you consider the EU is subsidizing those cars by purchasing carbon credits. At the same time, the EU has destroyed its energy sector by chasing windmills and solar farms instead of maintaining the much cheaper coal and gas alternatives, nuclear power, you name it. Overall, Europe has made a series of really bad decisions. And you can see now they're paying for it. It's completely and utterly falling apart. Just like the Washington state is falling apart, because what did they just do? They just voted for a millionaire's tax, SB 6346. And this is going to impose a 9.9% tax on personal income exceeding $1 million annually. The proposal aims to generate revenue for services like childcare, healthcare, and you know what's going to happen. Those people making over $1 million, they're going to say bye-bye. So all those Democrats in that state who pushed the agenda there, now they're going to decide to leave the blue states and head off to the red states. And that's exactly what we see happening right now. We see Starbucks founder Howard Schultz announces that his family is leaving Seattle for Florida the same day Democrats passed an income tax on Washington state. And he put out this whole thing saying, you know, they drove from New York City, they went to Washington, they started their business, and now they're leaving. And if you notice, a lot of people are moving away from the blue states. Now, we mentioned this going back in time, that eventually what you were going to see as the deep state, as the D's continually push their agenda, the Green New scam, all their policies, people were going to leave. Businesses were going to leave. And that's exactly what we see right now. We see those individuals moving to the red states. Now, if they did that to the blue states, are they going to use what they did in the blue states to the red states now? I know they're escaping because they don't want to pay more taxes. They're escaping because of crime. They're escaping because businesses are leaving. They're escaping because there's so many regulations. But again, if they did it there, doesn't it mean that they'll do it someplace else? And this should tell you something here, that once again, if you look around the country, the D's are destroying their states. Just like those individuals out in Europe, they're destroying their countries. And once again, if you follow the central bank, if you follow the Green New scam, if you follow everything that they're telling you to do, guess what happens? The whole thing starts to fall apart. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. And as the D's continually go after the wealthy, what do you think the wealthy are going to do? They're going to skip town. They're going to say, all right, you know what? Like Yamaha, we're going to take our business from California, move it to Georgia. Why? A lot less regulations, a lot less taxes. A lot of people want to work. We have to pay them a lot less. Fuel, energy is a lot less. Of course, people are going to make the move. And once again, you could see how it's all playing out. Soon, the people of those states, they're going to turn on the D's. And I think it's already starting to happen. Now, when you look at the oil prices right now, all of a sudden, oil jumped overnight. Now, remember, this oil that the gas stations already have, that the gas stations are preparing to accept, it's already been purchased, and it was purchased before the war. So there was no reason for the oil prices to go up. Jake put this out, and Representative Tim Burchett says, just filled up his dually and called it. The price of gas is a scam. America buys zero oil from Iran. The gas in your tank right now was bought weeks ago at the old price. The oil is already in the pipeline. They raised your prices anyway. Prices go up like a rocket and come down with a parachute. Yes, it was all done through fear. It has nothing to do with supply and demand right now. Because again, if the war started today and you see higher gas prices tomorrow, it's the same gas that was in the tank. There was no reason to raise the prices whatsoever. Think about what they just did here. And the whole thing is a gigantic scam. This was all done out of fear. The gas stations did it on purpose. There was no reason. Maybe it was the oil companies too. There was no reason for this to happen. Just like when people heard tariffs and everyone started to raise their prices. That is ridiculous. Nothing happened. It's all done out of fear. And this is exactly what they did. But you can see what Trump is doing right now. He's making this country energy independent. And we don't get our oil from Iran. Central banks cause inflation, and that is a threat to you, your savings account, your retirement. Ask yourself an honest question. Does your dollar go as far as it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even last year? So what does the next decade look like for you? and your savings. If your portfolio lacks exposure to gold, one of history's most reliable economic hedges, it's time to rethink your strategy. Gold has kept up with inflation and in many periods outpaced it. My friends at Noble Gold Investment specialize in helping people protect their wealth with physical gold and silver. Whether you're rolling over an IRA or making a direct purchase, their team walks you through the entire process and makes it very simple. No pressure, just education and experience. Right now, all new qualified accounts will receive a free 1/10 of an ounce American Gold Eagle as a thank you. Visit X22Gold.com. That is X22Gold.com and discover how easy it is to protect your financial future. Or just click the link in the description. And remember, past performance may not be indicative of future results. Investing in precious metals involves risk. Consult your financial advisor before making investment decisions. We get it here in the United States, most of it. And there's no reason why oil prices in this country should even fluctuate. It makes no sense whatsoever at this point in time, especially right now after a couple of days or a week or so. That makes no sense. And especially we don't get oil from that area. But Trump, he just announced to everyone that there's going to be a new oil refinery that's going to be built in this country. And there hasn't been one built in 50 years. He put this out on Truth and says, America is returning to real energy dominance. Today, I'm proud to announce that America First Refining is opening the first new U.S. oil refinery in 50 years in Brownsville, Texas. This is a historic $300 billion deal, the biggest in U.S. history, a massive win for American workers, energy, and the great people of South Texas. Thank you for your partners in India and their largest privately held energy company, Reliance, for this tremendous investment. It is because of our America First agenda, streamlining permits and lowering taxes, that have attracted billions of dollars in deals coming back to our nation. A new refinery at the port of Brownsville will fuel U.S. markets, strengthen our national security, boost American energy production, deliver billions of dollars in economic impact, and will be the cleanest refinery in the world. It will power global exports and bring thousands of long overdue jobs and growth to a region that deserves it. This is what America energy dominance looks like. America first, always. Now, developers say the refinery will process roughly 168,000 barrels of crude per day, strengthening domestic supply chains while reducing reliance on foreign refining capacity. Construction on the refinery is expected to begin later in 2026. And remember, Trump now is doing what? He is now shifting and moving away from what the central bank has done. So yes, the central bank, if you go back in time, moved manufacturers out of this country, moved the refineries out of this country. And Trump now is bringing it all back to this country. Now, he can't do it overnight, of course, because it takes time to build the refineries. It takes time to build the manufacturing plants. But while you're building it, what do you create? You create construction jobs. And we're going to see thousands of construction jobs all of a sudden pop up across the country. Because think about all of the investments that are coming into this country. So yes, we're going to see jobs start to be plentiful. And as we go into the latter part of this year, we're going to start to see all that come online. Now, remember, everything that Biden/Obama have, what they've been doing over the last 4 years, they've been lying to the American people. And the Fed has just been going along with it because they're all part of the same system. And they've been lying about inflation. They've been lying about jobs. They've been lying about pretty much everything. And all the job numbers are continually being revised over and over and over because, again, they're trying to put a lot of pressure on Trump. And while he's in the middle of transitioning all the jobs, they want it to look like that these jobs are being lost. But again, if you created fake jobs from the very, very beginning, and now you have to revise the job numbers, something is terribly wrong with all the calculations. The Kobisi letter on X put this out and said, U.S. job numbers have now been revised down in each of the last 13 months by a total of 710,000 jobs. This means employment was initially overstated by an average of 55,000 jobs per month. U.S. job numbers were revised down by another 4,000 jobs in January and 65,000 in December. This brings the December reading down to 17,000, marking the fifth contraction over the last 9 months. Since January of 2024, there have been downward revisions in 24 out of the 25 months. U.S. labor market data is more unreliable than ever. Because again, why are there downward revisions? They set Trump up, actually, if you really think about it. They created millions of fake jobs, and now everything has to be revised down over and over and over. And this is why Trump is bringing in his own BLS person and actually has to straighten this all out. Because again, Obama, Biden, the Fed, they've been lying to the people from the very, very beginning. But you can see that Trump, he has now controlled inflation, not on a case where we go back to 1971. He's using the Federal Reserve System against them. Remember, they calculate inflation per year. So basically, when you look at inflation right now, it's around 2.5%, getting very, very close to 2%. So as we get closer and closer to 2%, he wants the Fed to cut rates. Is this another way to mitigate the inflation? Absolutely. Because those people that are paying credit cards, those people that have loans, those people that want to buy a house, businesses that want to expand, if they use the lower interest rate, they have more money that they can spend because they don't have to pay it towards interest. Same thing with someone buying a home. It actually increases your buying power. So once again, Trump is still adding 2.5% or 2% as we get closer to 2% onto the already existing inflation. That's why it just doesn't feel better. Yes, he can level it off, but everything that you felt beforehand stays. It doesn't disappear. EJ Antoni, PhD, put this out and said, monthly mortgage payment on a median price home in February is down about 7.6% from start of 2025, but up 90.1% from the start of 2021. Peter Sayong, PhD, said, this is the inflation story right now. Even where prices are falling, voters are still psychologically comparing to pre-COVID, and they'll punish the party in power for it. And here's another example from EJ. This is why folks are still mad about the economy. The average America's weekly paycheck in February bought about 2% less than it did in January of 2021. So yeah, if you go back to 2021 and you're comparing everything, yeah, people are pretty darn upset because, again, who was president prior to 2021? It was President Trump. Then Biden/Obama took over. And what happened to inflation? Inflation, because the Inflation Reduction Act and the green agenda, all of a sudden you saw inflation all over the place. Again, that didn't shut down inflation whatsoever. And it's skyrocketing. Remember, it's cumulative. So if Biden went from 2.1% and he went to 3, then to 4, then to 8, then to 9, then to 7, then to 6, you got to add all those numbers up because it's cumulative. And if he's telling you that he's creating millions of jobs, actually it's the opposite. He's losing millions of jobs. So right there, people are feeling that pain. That's what people are feeling. And if you go back to 2021, remember, we were coming off of Trump's economy. We were coming off of that inflation. We were coming off of the low fuel prices. So yeah, if you compare it back then, no, it's not that great. But will it be getting better? Absolutely. And once Trump starts to really lower the fuel prices, once more of these illegals are deported, once he removes the income tax, all of a sudden the buying power comes back to the people. And yes, he can mitigate the inflation that we're experiencing today. Then eventually, I do believe what he's going to do is he's going to start to pay off the debt, which we'll be talking about in just a sec. And actually, when he starts to do that, what happens? Well, it removes the currency that's in circulation, sends it back to the source, and all of a sudden the buying power starts to come back. I think he's prepping and getting everyone prepared for sound money, if you really think about it. And think about what MasterCard is doing right now. They're launching a global crypto partner program to bridge digital assets and traditional payments. So right now, MasterCard is a new crypto partner program that unites 85 plus companies to bring blockchain payments into everyday commerce. MasterCard has unveiled a new global initiative. And basically what they're going to do, they're going to allow people to use cryptocurrency. So the program is designed to explore practical applications for on-chain technology within existing payment infrastructure, focusing on areas such as cross-border transfers, business-to-business payments, and global payouts. They said the digital assets are entering a new phase, noting the blockchain and crypto are increasingly used to solve real-world problems rather than operate purely as a parallel system. For instance, blockchain tools can enable instant settlement, programmable payments, and round-the-clock cross-border transfers, capabilities that complement existing payment rails rather than replace them. MasterCard's collaboration across cryptos is now moving in a completely different direction. And think about it. Trump is talking about cryptocurrency. Trump is putting together a basket of cryptocurrency. Trump is talking about using stablecoins. See where all this is going? Everything is being prepped. And actually, how do you build confidence? Well, you remove the central bank system, you pay back the debt, and you go back to sound money. You go back to gold. You revalue gold from $42 an ounce up to what it's going to be. Do I believe it's going to be a lot more than $5,000? Absolutely. Do I believe silver is going to be a lot more than $80, $90? Absolutely. I think it's going to be very, very close to probably $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in gold. And in my opinion, silver, $300 to $500 in silver. Because again, you have to remember, they use the paper market to convince you that gold wasn't doing anything while the paper currency continually lost its value. Now, people say, whoa, what about all this debt that we have? Well, if you look at the 14th Amendment and if you look at Section 4, it's a very interesting section here because this was ratified in 1868 primarily to protect Union debt from the Civil War and prevent Southern states or future Congresses from repudiating them. Invalidate Confederate debts, bond issued to fund the rebellion, and claims for compensation related to emancipated slaves. Section 4 explicitly voids debt directly tied to supporting a rebellion or an insurrection. So we've been told that when Obama came on the scene, he started the insurgency. This is when it all started. And it built and built and built over time. And we saw what? An infiltration of this country, which is an insurrection, a rebellion against this country. I think people have seen it across the states now. It's very, very clear. So if Congress back then did this for the rebellion during the Civil War, can this be applied to the debt right now? Now, let's say Trump is looking into the rigged elections. What happens if there was a rebellion, an insurrection in 2020, which there was? Can we go back to then 2020 debt? Because again, we've been fighting against insurrection since 2020. What was the debt back then? $27 trillion. What happens if Trump and his team proves that the insurgency, the insurrection started during Obama? This is when the country was being infiltrated. What happens if he shows that Obama should have never been president? What happens if he shows that he's not even a citizen? What happens if we go back to that period of time? Well, the debt back then was $10 trillion. Think about that for a second. And then what happens if we show that 1.5 or 2.5 trillion was done through criminal activity? What happens if it's proven that the central bank was in on this? They knew about it. What happens if we erase that debt? Is the debt that hard to pay back then? No, I don't believe so. And again, this was all put into place during the Civil War. Yes, it's in the Constitution. 14th Amendment, Section 4. And this was for insurrection or rebellion. And once again, all roads lead to Obama. So is Trump going to use this? Is this where all this is headed? Maybe, maybe not. And who decides all of this? Congress, under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, has the power to enforce the amendment via legislation. Now, can courts fight this? Of course they can. But again, if you have the House and the Senate in place, and we win the midterms, which I do believe we're going to win, and they look at all the evidence, and the Congress makes a decision that that debt is null and void because of this insurrection. There was a rebellion against the United States government, against the people of this country. Does it mean that this debt is then wiped out? Will it go all the way back to Obama, or will it just go back to 2020? But again, this is how we can remove a lot of this debt. Even if it goes back to 2020, and then we find out there's about, let's say $2 trillion worth of fraud and criminal activity, that brings it now down to $25 trillion. Can we pay this back? I do believe we can. If we revalue gold, gives us a lot of leverage. If we use stablecoin, gives us a lot of leverage. If we bring it all the way back to Obama, it makes it even that much easier. And think about it. Trump now is shrinking government, proving that there was a rebellion against this country, an insurrection. Actually, we're going to see another insurrection coming up soon. So I do believe Trump is going to have all the proof he's going to need to actually use the 14th Amendment, Section 4, to actually wipe out a lot of this debt. and put the country on a very firm footing. And think about it. While he's building the economy, while he's bringing back manufacturing, all these pieces now are coming together. And I do believe we're heading in the right direction. I think Trump is setting up the deep state, the central bankers. And in the end, I do believe that all of this is going to work. And eventually, as he sets all this up, the attack will be on the central bank system. And eventually, we'll remove the central bank system. And the people will take full control of the economic system. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.